Hello, I am Angelyn Spignesi, Arden, and I am presenting my lyrical analysis of Chapter 4 of Jane Eyre. And in this chapter, we have the introduction to Brocklehurst, a male force of the unconscious that Jane is asked to negotiate. Here begins the lyrical analysis. After we have spoken out, emergence out in Mr. Lloyd's ear, our alterity given voice the stepmother will not hear, not bear, yet adverse she shuts it in. She keeps us out, sent into the nursery, holding in, isolated yet accessible, outcast available. Preschool. We want a language, in wanting all we know a blow to the son's nose, no longer father's prohibition of that burst of impulse, still driven blow to nose when not yet word of school. We have something she is not ready to have, another perspective of its own temporality, its own spatiality. Another perspective would require interlocution. She forbids. She wants it out of sight, yet not gone entirely, in reserve, the back room nursery, after we had burst out of that red room womb. She pulls us back in nursery kept only for her desire, where there is no mobility, no speaking possible. For if she let us out, arranged a move out to school, she would lose the one behind a scarlet covering who had seen the thrusting sun within what was blindness, and the one who then negotiated her locked red room. Desiring through us, she cannot let us out. Nursery return, rejected as thrown back to a regressed nursery state, just as we had begun to speak of what was damask. Living together, we hear her every movement. We are close enough to her in her household to hear all that passes, their daily exercise. Regular sounds mark the day. We know the time by the angle of shadow. She is ever intimate. Aversion has filled us in this nursery place as we stay alone, complying. Her aversion, the very way she opposes us, pulls us further into her hold. Her aversion, push of a contrary direction, is what still binds us. Antipathetic symbiosis of the nursery now. We are living together in close union, bonded, yet we are in stasis, as she is of the holiday animated chair. And here I have a lyrical section called Obesity. Obesity, nursery stay, often for decades. Even through the bearing of our own children, we stay in the nursery kept. We move our family to be closer to her aversion. Her calls arriving daily to criticize our household managing, we wait for them. We direct every aspect of our being toward her contrary direction, set up crises with her to engage violently. The nursery is where we desire this violent holding suspension, not in her body, but not separate from it either. Now back to the lyrical analysis. Mr. Lloyd's mediation, and we have a location, even with a past. And we have begun to pass the reed possessions through us. They speak us. We are stronger. Message to that mama, we are stronger. Lunge back at son. We send that John Reed running back to his mother. We will no longer carry him covertly for her. We do not yet know how to speak through John Reed or see through to his meaning, yet we now hear him speak through us. At her, quote, they are not fit to associate with me, end quote. They are not fit to associate with me. They have not the fit to associate with me. We have a past. We have met some family. We see how we are not of the family here. Through John Reed speaking, we begin to enunciate ourselves, extolling ourselves. We begin to speak our place in the son's voice, a grandiose shout declaring our schism from the family. Well, this shout sends Mrs. Reed reeling. Unmediated action, reactions, Gateshead contiguous, acting out. The stepmother cannot face the daughter with John Reed speaking through her, cannot meet such speaking schism in relation. Instead, mother in her own fit, mother in her own John Reed burst. In Gateshead, mother hates the John Reed speaking back of daughter as becoming the John Reed force herself. She's crushing the child beneath her on the nursery crib, crushing mother with a mouth distended, daring the child to rise to speak, swirled the wind worlds, holding child under her full blast. Daring child to rise or utter, stay in place, sit in place, forces her to sit in place. Postum sedere, possession, mother in her own John Reed burst, where formerly John Reed, through mother's unconscious, had possessed the child. When child dares to face stepmother with the son speaking through, mother is in her own possession, crushing child on crib. The nursery is where we first name ourselves separate body, yet this body is connected, unmediated to hers, crushed beneath hers, a crib place where there is not yet any space between us, though we are no longer within her. We are crushed beneath her, threatening she bears down upon us. We witness her release as we are held by it. She who now is the embodiment of what daily was the sun's invasion is on top of the one she has punished for once becoming that embodiment. Stepdaughter and mother bodily unite in the nursery place where John Reed speaks through one while the other incorporates him. Their pact is still his blatant exhibition in a mode purely reactive, Reed, when neither have yet mediated his force through interlocution, with relation necessitating differentiation. We had called for that omniscient Father when confined within mother. He lowered to body fit, and now he speaks out of us while we are pinned under her. He speaks through us, surprising both Mrs. Reed and ourselves. Quote, "It seemed as if my tongue pronounced words without my will consenting to their utterance. Something spoke out of me over which I had no control." End quote. John and Mr. Reed are speaking out. We have been with Mr. Lloyd, finding some continuity of being, becoming a being, speaking being. When we are no longer within her, yet nursery cribbed, we are speaking, however not initiating. The Reed men speak through us, however still unmediated, as we are crushed beneath her. Yet this allows a reflection back of them to Mrs. Reed, making her more conscious of precisely what we had to carry in her unconsciousness. Making her more conscious of what she was unconscious. The way the Reed forces seized us once her unconscious, now these forces speaking at her through us, becoming conscious, becoming her conscious seizure of us. Making them less unconscious makes her seizures more conscious. She bodily seizes and crushes us. Two bodies becoming one. We have the Son and Father speak out of us to her, and she crushes us, one to her body. The crib scene, unmediated connection to her body, is what subtended the Reed possessions all along. As they had been infiltrating us, we originally at base were possessed by her. On the window seat and in the red room, recessed to and into her body chambers, the Reed forces bodily entered us. We became the physicality of them. And after Mr. Lloyd's mediation, we emerge from Reed possessions to a speaking conscious being in the nursery, which is to be no longer her interior, but we're not yet differentiated will consenting, which is an intermediate seizure. For it had been a match of males, John Reed speaking through us, becoming incorporated by her bursting reprimand to which Mr. Reed also speaks through us. Within this mother's possession is a multiplicity of voices requiring a mediation, a narrator, which is not possible as we remain literally under, placed by, possessed by her. The Father Son explicitly speaking through us without our mediation, our consenting will, is also the naivete in a nursery crib where we are not yet mature, are premature, even infantile, pinned by her, precluding any of our motion or speech, for we have not yet been educated in the ways to speak the Father and Son, speak to them, and speak through them, which is to be in relation to them, so that their emergence becomes figuratively placed through us, which is different from their speaking us. Through the brief interlocution with Mr. Lloyd, we received some distance from temporal, spatial, and class perspective to the Reed family, which became the space for the nascent speaking of what was once only the unconscious of that family. We begin to learn the language of the unconscious forces, and by imparting that in their preliminary speaking through us, we are still possessed, placed beneath, unrelated, uneducated in the Gateshead nursery. For Mr. Lloyd himself could not perform the operation of the Gateshead extrication. Interstice messenger, first interlocutor, he instructed a speaking, this word of desire becoming desire of school's word. Mr. Lloyd is where we awaken to the possibility of mediating unconscious desires, enunciating figurations. Mr. Lloyd initiated the possibility of Jane learning to speak for herself, yet he does not speak for her. These first blast speakings to Mrs. Reed are not yet her own initiation, because she's speaking the literal voices of son and father, but it adds some distance, more separate from the family now, more autonomy. She can take her own meals, sleep as she wishes, though as kept. It is almost completely dark in the room, the nursery. We have begun tugging the knots of our clothing, undressing. The party continues below, as it has every night of this holiday. We sit wide-eyed, taking in, hearing all, yet not wanting to be there, for we shirk from that society. Schism, her eye aversion filled, keeping us out. We would not want to be there, do not want to be in her company anyway, and we hear everything. Two in one home, not speaking, refusing contact as aware acutely of the presence of the other, passionately involved with the antipathetic other absent. This passion of schism is the counterpart of the possession, and we have touched her red secrets his word will not prohibit. Apart as completely engaged, cleaving to in the cleave apart. She's hugging her faded doll before the dying fire. She is collecting and she is silent. What is she doing by the fire night after night with her doll imagined alive? This doll is the one for whom she cares, with whom she sleeps, which soothes her to sleep, tender and, quote, graven image, and, quote, sensually stroked. Father has fallen, and our doll is likened to God. Doll, when the omniscient parent with whom we are no longer one, has lowered to human, and in this start a difference, nursery isolation, yet just as kept, intermediate, the doll is God, quote, graven image, end quote. Exodus 24, Isaiah 40, verse 18 to 20, Jeremiah 8, 19, Jeremiah 10, 14. What is she doing by the fire, night after night, with her doll imagined alike? This doll for whom she cares, with whom she sleeps, which soothes her to sleep, tender and, quote, graven image, end quote, sensually stroked. She is tucking this one in the nightgown's folds. She wants the cloth child to be happy, sleep well. The tucking evoking a kindness in mothering herself. She is preparing the sincere doting on her doll for a better mothering, human mothering. Doll, where we are no longer fused within the mother's body, is the doll which can stand for something else. What soothes continually persevering, and as such is the possibility of figuration, mediating function, extension of ourselves, yet not inner, not outer, potential relation to mother differentiated. Who appears externally? Who goes downstairs when the rejected child is nursery shut, are Eliza and Georgiana, split sisters, ringlets and Muslim. They proceed into that world of the ladies and gentlemen. Extreme offshoots of a Mrs. Reed self-sufficiency. They care for themselves, yet only on the surface. Eliza withholds, hugging profits closely to her chest. Stingy, she holds back. Nothing gets out of hand. Anxiously, every penny marked, she tabulates her accounts, would sell her hair to better them. Georgiana is sitting, a decoration of elaborate curls with the artificial flowers brought out of an addict's chest. She gives out. Effusive side of costume and drama she performs, and acting out. Literal sisters often split into Eliza and Georgiana as distinct expressions of some attempt to cleave when one is most nursery bound. Also, one person splits into these two when most shut inside the nursery. Using Georgiana to flaunt for an attention sorely needed, but then we must reserve, hold back, withhold, repress. Here is Eliza to warn and scrutinize, and we never can let go in feeling, never fully greet another. This enticing woman carrying the split sisters flickering, we are intrigued. As much as we go forward into the attraction, adorning feather, we are reduced, held back, accounts tabulated. Eliza and Georgiana are external manifestations of the one who has not yet traversed through the mother who runs the household. They accompany one another, are sisterly cycles, and at the base of them, that to which each spirals down, here is the nursery child sitting, still pinned down, as alone. Hungry sisters Eliza and Georgiana, each in their way hungry. No mother to feed us while kept in Mrs. Reed's nursery. No breast outside for a feeding. We are in the recesses of her possession as one body, so to be fed by her is to feed off ourselves. Kept inside regress, no feeding from without possible. Our schism with Mrs. Reed is the other side of her possession of us, requiring we cleave into worldly, false selves, Georgiana and Eliza, either giving out for a bite or hoarding what resources there are. Hungry, split sisters. They occur when we are in the nursery, crushed by mother, not fed from without. Eliza and Georgiana are Mrs. Reed's daughters, each ostentatious in her way, daughters of a mother petrified of insight. Their mother will not look in the nursery, refuses all interior, invested only in surface. Surface daughters, daughters who emerge to the surface, self-sufficiently repress and act out, while widow mother keeps inferior child shut up, repressed, as acting out. The nursery temptation is to continue feeding on ourselves, which becomes an overextended feeding out to others. We dote on our doll, feed the robin, become the under-nursemaid, tidying up others' affairs while shut in. Overextended giving, sign of being pinned beneath her in a nursery, feeding on ourselves as off others. Inherent in such overgiving is the cruelty interlacing Mrs. Reed's treatment of Jane. To feed out indiscriminately is to feed ourselves the delusion of doing good, giving to others as an indulging of an autoerotic self. Indiscriminate love contains a cruelty homologous to the cruelty of Mrs. Reed, locking child's interiority. We are vacant in such overgiving, vacant attention, breath on frost flower melting. A carriage drives through what was frost flower. We do not notice. Let it steam, vacant attention. We do not notice the carriage driving up. Habitually we are feeding out and feeding on ourselves only. At first we do not know we are being summoned out, afraid to leave, terrified of that which awaits outside, other rooms now abysmal. We would rather stay inside her possession, preferable. The days of their own regularity, we sensed her in our every pore. We prefer to stay under, after all, pace at that breakfast door, questioning this call. Quote, "What a miserable little poltroon," end quote. The narrator's exclamation arrives in the midst of Jane's, quote, agitated hesitation, end quote, at the breakfast room door. Crushed on crib, we become craven. To open the breakfast room door, to announce oneself as the one summoned, to announce in a breakfast room entry is not to be poltron. Threshold at breakfast room door evokes narrator's exclamation. What will acquire the narrative voice out of her possession with perspective needs to go through the breakfast room door threshold. What summons us out of the nursery rings for us through even our trepidation to leave that place is mother's black pillar. Quote, straight, narrow, sable-clad shape standing erect on the rug, end quote. Here is the call by mother through an erection, the stony stranger who measures and compares, evaluates critically. He looms over us, yet is within reach, pulls us forward within his reach. His features are prominent. He places us in front of him, eye to eye. He scrutinizes. He questions our moral standing. Are we the good child? He stands erect for a differentiation through opposition. Good or not. Good or not. Differentiate ourselves through speaking in front of mother. He stands for erecting opposition. He will pass judgment. The first opportunity at interlocution in mother's presence comes through her black pillar. He distances us through a scrutiny opposition, questioning of enough distance so we finally can speak in front of her. When we first dare to bite back at mother, she reacts moralistically. Brocklehurst arrives. He's not here for Eliza and Georgiana. Only Jane has gone to the chambers of mother's unconscious to hear of hell judgment. Evil is the child who has been possessed in mother's unconscious, intimately knowing its window seat, red room, nursery. His is a test of hell. Does she know the effects of wickedness in an afterlife? Unlike the Reed forces, he is grounded, columnar, asking her to speak herself up to some ground pillar of strength, no longer craven. We provide the way for mother's moralistic black pillar when we have been poltroon in the nursery so long we cannot say we have an inherent good. Brocklehurst bears down questions on whether she is a good child, and Jane cannot answer affirmatively. Her inability to speak her inherent worth in front of Mrs. Reed indicates how she is still possessed. And this constitutes a black pillar emerging from an intense fear of the stepmother's contrary view. Black pillar. Here is not a Mr. Lloyd mediation, for this one and Mrs. Reed's present, brought in by her to interview us, has not arrived to hear what Jane has to say. Monocentric, univocal. In asking her the biblical preference, he wants a special answer. He requires a special answer and a paternal authority, yet we have become heretic. For we have been through the red room, now heretic. Father's law weakened to descent to body-blooded word, rent strings, heterogeneous heart, no unified doctrine of Psalms. To Father's love, yet multiple configurations of revelations, dreams of Daniel, serpent of Genesis desires. No father authority, unified doctrine, and mother's retaliation, now a patriarchal black pillar, speaking on hell, pronouncing the child's heart as stone. Black and white, his monocentric desire to fit another into a cast already set. He does not bend. When we have been locked in mother's nursery too long, we turn to stone. We petrify. A rigidity sets in. We get critical, controlling, see something according only to its measure erection. We compare and we compete. Brocklehurst is the resort to opinion when we cannot stand for our worth, and he is the only way we can converse with the stepmother. We are shaky, symbiotic fidelity. We have believed her more. And the only way we can speak in her presence is through opinion, sounding like the stony stranger. We do not know who we are outside the nursery, yet we do know the Psalms are not interesting to us. We collect who we are by proclaiming our opinion when speaking to Brocklehurst in the presence of Mrs. Reed. Here is a beginning differentiation, assertion of our difference within her recess. His critical distance, oppositionalism, morality judgments, and monocentric thinking are necessary for eventual differentiation out of her nursery, first being spoken as opinion. And now I have a lyrical section called Critical Ordeal. Critic Ordeal. Severely he speaks of universal punishment, knowing only his own principles and opinion, his own direction. He is hard. Never relocating at another's stance, he installs the other in front of him, desiring a correct answer. He arrives a rigid columnar out of a vacancy. His speaking is an interview for leaving the nursery. Our mother is ordering the exact folding of our clothes in a drawer. We tuck in the corners of our bed at the precise angle, ensure the lines on our socks are completely parallel. We tell the younger siblings the prayer must be learned by the morning, or else they will be in a hell of fire. At the First Communion, we are posing in the white dress starched. We do not move or smile, not wanting to wrinkle dress or face in any manner. The sun tearing beneath our clothing provokes us sweating. We stand perfectly still and straight, staring into that sun, daring its further advance, attempting not to blink. Okay, now I resume the lyrical analysis. The mother is alone, untouched, not spoken to, her own vacancy becoming so vast, she seizes and crushes the child beneath her. That one bursts with the pressure of what the mother will not have or see, to which she will not speak, child stored further in a nursery until the numbness a vacancy through which the mother calls him. He is erect and formal, critical distance. Prominent, he speaks of universal punishment. Brocklehurst as black pillar, firmly grounded, emerging from the ground, thrusting up to heights while having a base at the blackness below. Below ground, he looks down from his conscious perspective righteously into the black hole the child has been kept. He sees black holes, her eyes to eye of his mouth, proclaiming her evil. Still not to extricate completely from that stepmother. Brocklehurst, in a first speaking interview for leaving the nursery, proclaims Jane wicked, while Mrs. Reed places the curse, preventing any of Jane's further speaking by making it a lie. Brocklehurst cuts the child out of the nursery haze as stepmother provides the curse, through which she must follow the child to any other life. Curse is what guarantees the schooling be differentiation within the unconscious, also mothers, but not as a complete extrication from it. Stepmother's curse is that child lies, that the Red Room occurrence was lie, that father's word did not descend seizing body, that body with its blood rhythm desire cannot begin to speak, since its word will lie. That body with its blood rhythm desire cannot begin to speak, its word will lie, is also his proclamation that heart is stone. The stone heart has no strings for her to rend. The Red Room seizure was false anyway. Brocklehurst talks at the child, and within his ministerial condemnation arrives the stepmother's accusation, which cuts the child to the heart. Curse is her desire of our heart. She is in our heart, rending its strings still, cutting us to it, demanding we see it in this exposure of our marginal existence. She knows the direction of our heart and can cut right to it. Heart leaving her must remain with her in part. her curse that we must not let her go as we go through her. Jane's survey of Mrs. Reed's person after Brocklehurst leaves is a result of the Brocklehurst differentiation. After Brocklehurst speaks and leaves, Jane has enough distance for the first time to see her aunt, her body, her physiognomy, the way she dresses and manages the household, seen with an objectivity not before possible. Objectively we look. We set her before us, throw her against ourselves, throw her into the opposition Brocklehurst dictated. His black-white focus gives us distance. She is far enough. We can throw to her in what is distance. We pace it to ensure there is a space between us, not beneath one body yet two bodies, and one is pacing back and forth to the other, bringing her up before objective stance. We walk it. Passion of resentment, animosity, passion of animated forces of her rejection, in her throwing us back to an original state as if unanimated. Her male forces have animated us. John Reed, Mr. Reed, Brocklehurst, where we were no one, lost as possessed, nobody on the window seat, red room, nursery regressed. Her animus spirits have animated us to this passion. We speak now a cruelty back. We take off from Brocklehurst monocentrism, giving her back a self-referential comparison. Discrimination through comparison. Jane dislikes Mrs. Reed more than anyone except John, and Georgiana, not Jane, is the liar. Differentiation within her recess, passionately speaking dislike of her mansion. Cruelly incisive, Jane cuts apart. We erect ourselves through comparison, speaking dislike. What more do we have to say? Her ice eye upon ours, asking us as if to an adult, for we have earned this right to speak back to her, negotiating her unconscious forces, grown to an age speaking ourself in comparison. Mr. Reed had provided for our speaking, saying we were no longer baby, no longer fused, and now we fire back. Quote, that eye of hers, that voice stirred every antipathy I had, end quote. Our pathos, our suffering, how we endured in her keeping, suffer, passio, passus, our passions are turned against her antipathy. We release the passion against her that we had been keeping locked up for her. Passionate declaration of our righteousness, her wrongness. After we have obtained the Brocklehurst oppositional distance, we have alterity. We are differentiating an erect being apart from hers, to whom she is no relation. We are so different we will never visit, yet will speak of her cruel treatment. Their hearts differ. They are no longer fused. Jane, not confined in recesses, only unconscious. A heart beats passion through resentment, feels and feels differently. Brocklehurst provides the manner of first speaking back to the aunt, one-sided, Mora's lecture. Jane uses his accusatory condemnation and monocentric position to refer to her own goodness, and from a distance judge the aunt as cruel and hard-hearted, saying she will retaliate by a public speaking of the tale. The text Brocklehurst left with her is a public account of the sudden death of a child, quote, addicted to falsehood and deceit, end quote. The Brocklehurst mode publicizes, and that is his form of severance. Words as weapon, images of our tale, slices us apart from her. We see her objectively and have narrator perspective, potentially publicized. Our narrative slices us apart. And here's a lyrical section called Mrs. Reed. Mrs. Reed, your acute brow, arched eye of ice, you have thrown me back to the weapon which finally turns on you, becomes the speaking your nursery silenced, rigid weapon of righteousness, columnar speaking, hell fires. I face you and the speaking fires out. I am shaking uncontrollably. You say violently, offering me a cooling of water, a rest, for I stand at a distance to burst that bond with the claim of my goodness. Narrow and straight pillar of excellence, weapon of a military right, I pronounce myself as against all you are. Together, We are shaking the passion you resented. Mrs. Reed, you have twisted. Contorted face, hands no longer in their duty, have risen to this trembling. Your own curse has carried me to this encounter. For I aim for your chest, the heart is stone. I will disengage this reddening blast, each of its particles stinging every wall of your solid mansion. Black columnar one has us both now. Returning to you the Brocklehurstian curse, I challenge you to this red and black, this violent and critical intimacy. But you do not sit in it. You leave the room abruptly, which is my move beyond your need as stone heart without releasing what curses us both. Okay, so now back to the lyrical analysis. Speaking as Brocklehurst is different than speaking as the others, because here there is a distance. This possession, after all, is not by a reed, and follows Mr. Lloyd's human mediation. So we are not in her back room recess, yet standing full view in the daily breakfast chamber. The Brocklehurst possession is a way to differentiate Jane's qualities from those of Mrs. Reed's. Yes, in a moralistic and oppositional manner, the extremity of which is proportional to the pull of the nursery vine. Brocklehurst pertains to articulated differentiation within the premises, quality comparison to her face, not a move outside, which the earlier possessions by the Reed forces more were attempting. The result of differentiation within her premises, how qualitatively their hearts differ, is severance. Jane's passionate statement differentiates, yet the soul exalts as if an invisible bond had burst. Jane has said it is the other woman who has treated her cruelly. She claims she will never call that woman aunt, says she is no relation. Jane is saying she will live a lie here. And in this sense she is caught already by the aunt's curse, fulfilling it by vowing to speak the lie that Mrs. Reed is not her aunt, which is not to see her relation, her own relation to the aunt's deceit, which is herself to be deceitful. Brocklehurst's chastening implicates Jane's unchaste nature, her unchastity, inchaste, incestus, incestuous. For in each of the possessions there had been a familial incest with John Reed, with Mr. Reed, and it is in regard to them that Mr. Brocklehurst is summoned to correct, chasten her. When we take on the Brocklehurst mode, we make explicit, demonstrate as well as condemn, the incest implicit between us. We have the distance to afford an articulation of the passionate resentment within fusion, now as if adult to adult, but not, is incest. Incest spoken, now public statement releasing us. To demonstrate the passion once implicit in Mrs. Reed's unconscious, make her face it, is to make visible the unchaste bond, antipathetic symbiotic. To break out is to threaten a publicity, for if we speak it, even in condensation, we are no longer one with her unconscious, not locked up, and can move out to school. Yet as we have been Brocklehurst possessed throughout our demonstration, we are still possessed by her. The severance is cursed, severance without releasing us entirely, as if. In a sense, Jane experienced the effect of her own evil here. The mode of righteous and doctrinal defense, which can be hell, and which she herself has fired out, is her grey day realization of the evil of her Brocklehurst possession, now nothing within or without. So the elation of the as-if burst bond, after the Brocklehurst encounter, now becomes remorse. Fires of hell through the black pillar have blasted back upon the red room tyrannies a way out. Lesson of the grey field is that one must not stop there. Nothing feeds here. She stares into the wintry field. It would be easy to slide back into the nursery bond invisibly evermore, for she was our only intimacy. Speaking to and from Brocklehurst has cleared out a space, no longer possessed by, exterior to forces of a mother's fusion, is the grey field of an open question. Here the nipped grass and stiffened leaf is why we remain bonded a lifetime with mothers invisible, absorbing the red and black possessions. Fearful of the vastness permeating hollowness of the gray field outside the nursery bind. So too often we return to the nursery to feed on ourselves, staying home alone, trapped, eating more, becoming sloppy, becoming confused and unhealthily fatter, even invisible fusion with stepmother. Gray field shadows differ considerably from those of the nursery. Both are places of stasis, yet the question echoing the gray field, "What shall I do?" never emerged in the nursery where there was no initiating eye. Gray field contains a question positing Jane's existence apart from the blastings of mother's possessions. That she exists and has a fate within which she is an initiating figure is the gray day question, never reaching the nursery, in which I could only be a doll and bed and clothes knotted, and the nursery itself as mother's kept doll knotted. After the immolations, we have been blasted and blast back a constitution of some I. Yet many run back to the nursery saying it was never meant. Instead, Jane stands, quote, "a wretched child enough," end quote, asking the question, now incantation, "What shall I do?" And a voice calls back, first exterior to mother's body and no longer pinned beneath or kept by it. Outside the mansion, it takes a call, and Grayfield listening. Now a being continuous ear, hearing the calling. Sequestered part of the plantation with its silent trees, she is called again in a recess, yet here is the first recess, not within or kept beneath the mother, external to and removed from her, though on her grounds. It is Bessie. The call is for lunch. Why doesn't the naughty child come when called? Bessie is who has done the homily before, and now Jane can go forward to meet the maid's, quote, transitory anger, end quote. After conversing with Brocklehurst in the mother's presence, Jane now is less susceptible to the moralistic scolding from without. So she embraces Bessie's scold, holding her arms out where formerly she would have cowered while projecting an attack. Now Jane's response is, quote, frank and fearless, end quote, and it pleases Bessie. Bessie calls in the gray field at the first trace of an initiating eye to tell Jane she is to pack for school. For Jane had to speak her way out of Gateshead, each rebound from the violent rejections within the fusion within Mrs. Reed, constituting an I, now serving severance. I comes with the discerning in relation to another, the heterogeneous qualities, once unconscious. At each step of Jane's negotiation of the Gateshead possessions, constituting herself bolder, Mrs. Reed loosens. As the possessions spoke through her back at that mother, they affected Mrs. Reed. John Reed's voice, grandiose proclamation, "They are not fit to associate with me," had Mrs. Reed a twirling whirlwind. Mr. Reed's voice booming out in omniscience, and that stepmother's composed eye became troubled with fear. A Brocklehurstian threat of public condemnation, and the stepmother trembled to a placation. At each negotiation of our unconscious forces, we delineated more firmly our alterity, becoming differentiated, hardier, more embodied, while parts of that mother loosened, a trembling, allowing some sequestered gray space to open to better aspects of mothering. Now the maid who used to scold sees through her own scolding with the help and from the perspective of her own concerned mother. The maid who used to scold in synchrony with the Mrs. Reed tyranny has softened, wants us to be softer, not as cool, asks for a kiss, is not afraid of our warmth. Mutual embrace allowing a departure of this Gateshead family. Within this embrace is packing and a departure, not possessing, not possession. When the maid who used to scold in synchrony with the Mrs. Reed tyranny softens, mediates, and enters the child's side as benign, the result is the pleasures, song and cake, enchanted story. We begin reversing with the stepmother, obtaining the distance to face and finally speak to her, discharging yet a beginning speaking of an initiating I, opening a space for mediating the annihilating and moralistic forces, claiming her, also our own. We do not know how figuratively to impart in life those forces yet. Awkwardly, we move through them to separate from her mansion to go to school and to learn what she could not. Here ends the lyrical analysis of Chapter 4. Thank you for listening.